Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to do a brief review of this JKOO Wakizashi, and a couple quick disclaimers before I get into it. One, this is a review sample sent to me from JKOO Swords. If you think that makes me biased, you know, I suppose, at the start. The bit to know about this particular review sample is that I reached out to JKOO and asked for it. I said, I don't have a Wakizashi. Would you mind providing me with one? This time I'm not going to break it. I am going to use it as a visual aid because people are now asking me questions about Wakizashis and asking to compare them to other swords, and I don't have an example to cut with. Fortunately now I have a couple thanks to vendors like JKOO who have sent me them, so cheers and special thanks to them for providing said sample, which incidentally, if you have questions after this review is done about this sword in comparison to others, or Wakizashi in comparison to other types of swords, I now have one tool in my arsenal to help answer those types of questions, so throw them in the commentary down below. Other bits to note about this particular one is I've noted I do study Japanese style swordsmanship. I've talked about this in other videos. If you're new to my channel, I do study Japanese style swordsmanship, but I haven't reached any level where I get to use a Wakizashi, so I don't know formal kata, and it's still a type of sword. Even though it's familiar, it's unfamiliar at the same time, so I don't have that to share with you in terms of kata, how it feels in the hand. I can equate some things about how it feels in comparison to a katana, because it's supposed to have some similarities in terms of how it draws, how it sheathes, tensions in various places, transitions on different fittings. A lot of those are similar, but formal kata I don't have any experience with. So again, novice opinion, keep that context in mind as you hear my ramblings. Build quality and all that kind of stuff I'm going to go over. Before I do, though, notes about this particular one. So when JKOO said, hey, what kind of Wakizashi do you want? I asked about a Tamahagane piece, and that's what this is. So it's a little bit more expensive. It's roughly $550-ish for a Tamahagane style blade. It's not laminated or folded. I believe it's just it's folded. It's a Tamahagane style blade, so it has a hara, but I don't believe it's laminated or anything like that. So the base price for that is about $510. I also asked for this silk, and it's real silk, and there's an upcharge of roughly $40. So it's about $550, a little bit better than that for the sword, and then it's usually about another $50 to ship it to the US. So the rough out of pocket would totally be about $600 ballpark for this sword. I got to pick all the fittings and whatnot, and generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with them, though there's not a quality level of fitting that I thought really suited this sword well. So there is a Wakizashi fitting. You'll see them in better detail in a moment, but I didn't find that the fittings actually were up to the level of the blade. And I find the copper fittings, what JKOO would consider the high-end fittings, I don't particularly like the aesthetic of them. And the low-end fittings, simple iron fittings, there wasn't like a handmade-y one that I thought really matched this well. So it's got some really cool pieces, but it's got some bits that I think are beneath the quality. Just know that this wasn't a model that they sell. It's one that I asked them for, and so I did the best with what I thought was available to my aesthetic choices, or to my aesthetic preferences. But I'll admit that you might do better if you pick something. These were my personal choices. So, and I'm not overly thrilled with them, but I kind of knew I wouldn't be. I just didn't like the copper, gaudy, goldy mix stuff. I didn't think that looked particularly good. Anyway, I'm going to go over Bitbob Fit Features now that you know the price, and I will link in the description below JKOO and provide measurements and all that kind of stuff. You'll see that in the description down below. All right, so the first thing that I do is I talk about the fittings, the pommel, this end cap bit here, the butt cap, the kashira area here, and it's got a kind of leaf theme to it. Now, in my mind, I can kind of take it back and think of them as autumn leaves, like kind of autumn grass, given that it has this kind of autumn color to it, but I wasn't really going with a story in mind when I thought of the fittings. They just seemed to be the ones that fit the way I kind of liked, and the choices did seem limited. And the quality of the fittings is just a little bit beneath the rest of the quality of the sword. That was my choice, though. I don't want to harp on JKOO. They offered higher end fittings. I didn't really like the look of them, so I chose something lower end. That was my aesthetic choice. And I don't necessarily mind it. The copper fittings that are embellished with kind of gold and silver and stuff like that, I don't generally like the look of. So I'll stand behind my choice here, but there weren't as many higher end options with Tsukashi simple iron looking fittings. And so anyway, this is them. I can make out casting lines. They're not great, but again, my choice, and I knew these were the lower end options. What they did do is line up the ito really, really, really well. And so the transition here is beautiful. It's tied just right. Or at least as good as I would expect. It's the ito as well. The knots are as tight as I felt on any company out of China. It's really well done, and the ito feels really good in my hand. It's supposed to be real silk. I like the color. I don't know if it's real silk or not, but it feels soft. It feels like genuine real silk. So for the cost of the upgrade, there is an aesthetic benefit here. It doesn't look or feel like cheap silk, and it is very tight. It looks worn a little bit though, almost. It looks like somebody swung it around a little bit. I would say this almost had like a handled feeling to it, and I don't know why that is because it came to me new, but that's kind of the impression that I get, is that it looks like it has a little usage to it. There are some minor bumps in the, if I'm being very nitpicky, in how the ito lays next to each other, but overall I think this is really quite a good execution of the ito, the maki, how tight it's supposed to be. A lot of times I'll be able to push these knots around and stuff like that, and I can't do that here. Now I chose black semegawa. I like black semegawa. A lot of the times these swords don't have particularly high-end ray skin, and black semegawa obscures some of the nodule sizes. I think it was a good choice here aesthetically. I think it works well with the scabbard and all that. The Minuki, I almost wish I had asked for none. These are, I don't even know what these are. I can't tell. They look antique almost though. I know they're not. I know they're cast pieces, but I don't actually know what they're supposed to be. And in my hand, they don't feel bad on the handle. My fingers kind of wrap around them a little bit, and it gives me an extra sense of purchase. It's not bad, but I think I might have liked to just skip the Minuki entirely on this particular piece. They take up more space than I think is personally welcome. They did exactly what I asked them to do. In retrospect, though, I think I might have skipped doing Minuki. Anyway, as we move up, it has a nice hourglass shape. It fits and indexes really well in my hand. I kind of know where the positioning is. I really think they did actually a really good job on the handle. My aesthetic choice, or my aesthetic preferences and fittings, I think might have held back the opportunity for it to be a little zazzier, but I'll stand behind it, and I think what they could work with, they did a great job with. Transitions up to the fuchi are actually really well in line. This fitting looks like it's supposed to have a raised rim. They played into that, and I think the transitions line up pretty well. Again, casting quality on the fuchi is not great. It's, all the same gripes they would have about the kashira, but overall it's not bad, and generally it's handsome. If I move up to the Suba area, it has this kind of chrysanthemum cutout Tsukashi style. It just feels like powder coated kind of paint stuff. It doesn't feel particularly high end, though it is Wakizashi size. I went with silver seppa as well, and they line up pretty good. I like the overall look of the silver seppa, and I like how the mix of colors, honestly. So there's kind of blackened iron fittings, a blackened Suba with silver seppa that line up to this silver habaki, which has some brass component on it, which kind of ties in with the ito, as well as some of the kind of natural tones and kind of orangey colors in the semegawa here. And so I think overall, thematically, nothing pulls my eye apart, but the mix of metals actually, I think, worked out pretty well. I don't recall if I asked for silver or not, or if I even asked for the habaki, or if JKOO chose it, but it does work pretty well. Incidentally, the habaki is like an emulation two-piece. It's a simple brass habaki with some silver panels stuck on the side, and this time it doesn't seem too wide. The last JKOO katana that I had, the habaki of this type felt a little bit wide and didn't sit with me well. Fittings, they line up well, they feel good, and well, basically it fits like it's supposed to. I have the handle disassembled at the moment, so you can't see it, but effectively the tension on the habaki is really good. It draws like a katana should. It holds in, it doesn't rattle a lot, and the tension on it is pretty good. I didn't have to do any work or anything like that when I took it out of the box. It was ready to go, and I could do some practice with it. Though again, formally, I don't do any kind of training with Wakizashi. I haven't gotten there yet. As we go to the scabbard, there's kind of notable horn components on the saya. It's got ishime down here and samegawa up here. And I can really only make out one kind of fault in the paint, and that is where this point meets. It looks like the ishime was applied over the gloss. So this was probably gloss black originally, and then had ishime applied. The transition, though, feels really good. It also has like a slight taper in, down kind of right here on the fuchi. Ideally, that is flattened, but I'm being very nitpicky here. Though this, again, is like a $600 Wakizashi, so that's not cheap. And the components, though, on the side, I think would be what you would choose from any level of JKOO sword. I don't think this was a higher-end scabbard just made for the Tamahagane series of blade. So we're picking from the same kind of parts bins across the variety of things that JKOO offers. The handle, though, I think they did an absolutely excellent job on the Ito wrap. Again, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. It's not the best thing out there, but I think they did a really good job overall. Now, the blade, I do want to actually briefly, before I talk about the business end, talk about the handle. And this waki just looks reasonably clean. The ska doesn't look particularly great. You know, it doesn't have file markings in great detail, but the munmachi, hamachi area are in line with one another. That's nice to see. They're not dug in too deep, though they are a little bit on the deep side. I can make out a signature on here, and it just looks different. I haven't had a Tamahagane blade before, and if the nakago looked the same as anything else when it's, you know, supposed to be homemade bloomery steel, it might make me raise my eyebrow. But this nakago looks reasonably well dressed, and if nothing else, slightly different than some of the other swords that I've seen. It has a marginally different shape and some different file markings and stuff like that on it. What does that mean? Not a whole lot, but it's something that I at least like to. I was hoping it'd look different since it's supposed to be a special kind of steel in it. It does. It's not remarkably clean. I think more energy certainly could be put there. But in fairness, $600 for a Tamahagane blade is not a huge amount of money given the amount of work that's supposed to go into these things. So most people don't take their swords apart ever. I can't blame them for not investing a huge amount of time in something that most people are never going to see. There is a signature there, though, and so that much is appreciated. If I move on to the blade, the business end, what people actually care about. So I asked for 2 bohi and a Hira-zukuri style wakizashi, and I made overtures towards a fire-looking Hamon, and I think they did a really good job. I didn't have any particular specifications. I was really willing to have them do what they felt was best, but they did all of the things that I asked for. So it has kind of a fiery-looking Hamon. It's not exactly that, but it has spots on it that I think really are pretty zazzy and that I like a lot. The Hira-zukuri, this feels a little bit more like a shinogi-zukuri that's been kind of flattened. And technically it is a Hira-zukuri blade. It is, but it has the same shape and dimension and thickness as like a shinogi-zukuri style blade. It just seems like they didn't polish on a Yakote and they sanded the bevels down just a little bit. And Hira-zukuri blades can have slightly different dimension to them, and it's difficult to articulate, even though I talk about swords on the internet, and that's exactly what I should be able to do. It seems like it should be a little wider, and the geometry should be a little different. It should feel more like a purpose-built blade in that dimension. This doesn't. But at the same time, it is Hira-zukuri. It has 2 fullers in it. It does the thing. It goes down into one profile. I don't make out the shinogi. They did a good job on that, but at the same time, I think maybe I should have leaned into doing a shinogi-zukuri style wakizashi rather than a Hira-zukuri. I think it would have been a little bit closer to what I was asking for. The fullers have a little bit more intention in termination, and they terminate in the same spots. The blade also came very, very sharp. I'll talk about cutting in a moment. Hamon is easy to see in any light. It's zazzed up to the moon. I can make it out in a dark light, and it has a lot more detail that comes out in the sunlight. There's a hara that is more bold in some places, and I don't believe it's laminated, so there's no lamination line to track down, but there is some kind of mokume-style hara scattered throughout the surface of the steel. It comes out better in some places. Mostly it comes out better, down towards the handle area of the sword. Towards the top third, towards the cutting plane, it kind of tapers off a little bit, and I don't make it out. I can make it out under the polish, but it's not as bold. So that said, it pops up in sunlight. Again, there's a lot of detail that comes out in the sunlight. Planes-wise, it's very, very smooth all the way throughout the bohi. I can notice more rippling, but overall they're actually pretty smooth as well, and they don't wander around. The mune is also smooth-ish. It ripples a little bit, but overall it's not too bad. Anyway, now in terms of cutting with the sword, I brought it out and I just cut a pool noodle with it. Again, I will use this. I will cut more things. I will do more stuff with it, but at this time this is really more of a visual aid to use as a comparison. And so cutting, I didn't want to push it to failure or do anything like that at the time. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for it and cut a pool noodle. And I've had shit luck cutting with pool noodles. On the day that I cut this, I actually cut with a few other swords, and the pool noodles laughed at me and bounced around. And a mixture of my bad technique and lack of sharp blades meant that I was not having a whole lot of luck on the day. But when I brought this out, I was quite successful in cutting pool noodles. It popped them apart in very warm weather. Sometimes in cold weather, they're a little bit easier to cut. With very sharp swords that you're familiar with, they're also easier to cut. In this case, with a single-handed wakizashi that I'm quasi-familiar with, it did a good job in popping those noodles apart. It was very easy to cut with. It was very comfortable. I indexed it well, and I was able to range well, but more importantly, it's just very sharp and has a geometry that lends itself to cutting and just kind of pop those noodles apart. So it was a joy to cut with. I think it's going to do well on water bottles. I think it's going to do well on just about anything that I cut. But I do want to preface that Tamahagane is not necessarily bad steel for cutting, but the purpose of this relatively expensive thing is more in the aesthetics. If you like the Hamon, the look of the steel, the hata that you get, the story behind the work that goes into making it, then that's kind of why you get it. As a performance characteristic, it's not inherently better. And what you can see is that the build quality on the sword could be executed by JKOO on any of the types of steels that they have. And some of the, like the 1060 or other steels that they offer would just be less expensive and likely perform the same way. So it's not a performance thing to get, and that's what I want to make clear, is that this offers a lot of artistic coolness in terms of the pattern and the steel and all the delicious, wonderful things that are in the surface of the steel to admire. But it doesn't mean that it's going to cut through anything. It doesn't mean it's going to last longer. In fact, I don't know for certain because I haven't pushed it all the way, but I would speculate that it's probably not going to be as durable as one of the less expensive 1060 blades that are made from kind of a homogeneous steel that the JKOO uses quite a bit to work with. So what it is, though, is very, very pretty to look at, and in terms of pool noodles anyway, it cuts like a demon. So anyway, that's the usage, that's the meat and potatoes, frankly, of the review. If I give you the gist of do I think this is worth it or not, if you like Tamahagane steel and you're after something aesthetically very pretty, then I think this has a lot to offer. JKOO did a great job, and I really like the handle. I like that it came apart pretty easy. I like the dressing on the Nikago. I think everything on here could be stepped up a notch, but frankly, the price for a Tamahagane Wakizashi is not bad. Shape is not bad. There's some details and nuances about the geometry that I might harp on, but this feels good. It's sharp. It did come with some minor scuffing from Saya rub on the scabbard, but really there's not much to complain about. It's a relatively expensive sword. If you want Tamahagane, then yes, I'm really happy with what I got. I would say the fittings miss me a little bit. The scabbard is good enough. The blade, I think, does a good job. I might have stuck with Hira-zukuri just so that JKOO could execute what they're maybe used to working on, or what the other bits demand for fitting. Maybe they need it this size so that they can use the kind of pre-made scabbards and stuff. Not sure. But I think if I went with Hira-zukuri, I would have gotten closer to something that was the way it was exactly supposed to be. As it is, this again is not bad. And I know this is the part where I'm supposed to say, is it worth it or not? In short, yes. I do think, yes, it's worth it. $600 is not an insubstantial amount of money, but if you're getting a nice Tamahagane blade put together reasonably well that cuts and feels like this does, then I would say yes. I would say no, though, if all of this artistic stuff doesn't matter to you. I think JKOO would probably make you this wakizashi for half the price, maybe even less if you went with 1060 steel. So do bear that in mind, that if you're not looking for the aesthetics of this sword, the performance can likely be had at a much smaller price. And if this aesthetic look doesn't matter to you, then I would go that direction. All right, I think I've mumbled my way through this review enough. Hopefully it's been helpful. Again, a special thanks to JKOO for sending this. If you have any other questions about this wakizashi, if you want to see it compared to anything else, let me know in the commentary down below. And that's all I got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.